My biggest surprise, maybe also a damaged mindset of working in payments. It was almost too easy because people was like, okay, is this it? People was getting nervous. What happened with my cup? What about my money? Did you stole my credit card details? Some people actually thought that it was scam. Yes, it might make sense for you because you work in this industry, but picking a random consumer off the street, it might not. You need to realize in our industry, even though it's technically easy and a good solution on the paper, it might not be adapted. Make sure what exactly do you tell the consumers that is going to happen. Adaptation from a consumer perspective is always slower than you anticipate.
Welcome to the Patreon podcast. Here, there's no fluff and no sales pitches, just real conversations. I'm your host, Kristensen, and at Patreon, we bring together bold and curious founders and leaders to share their stories, their lessons they have learned, and the hard truth behind their success. We are all about challenging the status quo and explore fresh perspectives while focusing on what really matters. People. If you're craving deeper conversations, you're in the right space. So let's dive in.
Ruben, thank you so much for joining the Patreon podcast.
Sure, and thank you for the invitation. I'm glad to be here.
Of course. And as you know, the first question I ask all my guests is to introduce themselves with a fun fact. So without further ado, Ruben, what's your fun fact?
Okay, a fun fact. I love watching Disney movies.
Disney movies.
Especially the older ones. Not so much the new ones, but like the old classic ones is my go-to. That probably is a fun fact, I would say.
I have to ask because we are sitting in Scandinavia. When you say old classic Disney, are you watching them originally in English or the translated Danish versions?
Good question. So for me, there is only one answer, and that is the original English with all the famous voice actors and songs and everything, not translated.
Yes, I like that. I am a big Disney fan myself. I love it.
I think everyone loves Disney movies, right? It's maybe just a matter of if you want to admit it or not, maybe.
Indeed. And what is it about Disney movies and the originals that you like so much?
I think if you watch an older Disney movie and compare it to a new one, there is quite a hard storyline actually in it when you basically see that it's maybe meant for kids end of the day. It is like parents disappearing, even dying, and then kids in a form of shape of a human or an animal growing up, learning to take care of themselves. So quite tough storyline actually, with a quite good meaning as well.
Yeah, they are. Yeah, they are definitely another generation of storytelling. Yeah. That's for sure. I want to have a conversation with you about your career journey and your experiences and lessons learned.
Sure. So without giving you my total detailed CV since I graduated, overall, I more or less all my career been working with everything from money transfer back in the Western Union days to a more traditional consumer finance in Ressourcebank, and then to where I am now, which is e-commerce plus acquiring. I worked for a Danish company, a Danish PSP called AltaPay, MasterCard, where I know yourself had a career. And then now with Shift4, which is an international payment company, processor, acquire, more or less taking care of everything you can imagine in terms of payments. If I look back, for example, at Western Union, it was how you moved money around, which of course is totally different today. But back then it was actually quite huge that you went into an agent and you sent money to your family, wherever that is, where of course today that is fully digitalized. Everything is not only digitalized, it's also totally embedded in ways that I would never imagine it to be honest. So I see how everything is starting to be bundled together. It's being consolidated. And that is basically the market as of today for payments. You cannot only build your business on delivering one or two services, you need to think from a unified perspective to say, how can I bundle or streamline the offerings into something that my consumers or partners can utilize? So that's definitely the biggest learning, that things are being consolidated all the way around. You need to make sure you follow that change in the market and that you embrace it as well, to say it might be something that can be contradictory or even not a benefit for your company, but it might be later on if you are willing to think a bit differently from the traditional way that you might have done business. So I think change, adaptation, really the key focus on how to survive in this industry.
Yeah, for sure. And through your career and through the different businesses that you just mentioned, how did you go about changing and adapting and staying alert to new emerging trends?
I can tell you the personal experience. I think in the beginning of my career, I was very much focused that you can only learn and stay relevant if you take relevant education or certification or courses, where I would say the very recent years I have imagined that it's not only about educational background, it is actually more people skills, down to people skills. Can you talk with everyone? How is your network? Are you introvert, extrovert? Are you okay creating new relations? Looking back, even though I didn't pay much attention, I see everything that has happened since I had what we can call a career, if that should be the word. It's actually personal relations. That is, of course, if you scratch the surface, you need to have more than a personal relation. You need to have some kind of skill sets, right? End of the day, but overall, for me, the way I do it is networking and events. What kind of events is there out there? I'm not going to everything, but I'm trying to be quite picky in where I use my time. That is usually where I get the trends and standard from the markets. And in many ways, also looking back, I see the things that has been discussed, presented on events. Just to give you an example, as the crypto market, when that started, I saw that as an event in 12, I think. And everyone was like, this is never going to happen. But then you see many years later, it was actually happening. So I think if you adapt the info, especially from scale-ups and startups, they have a good idea on what is going to happen the next few years.
What would you say is the must-dos in order to be good at building relations, expanding your network, and make sure you show up in the right places?
I think overall I have maybe 2-3 events yearly where I'm like, this is where I will be no matter what, because it's such a big event. I know everyone from the industry, from a standard perspective, would be there. So that's more like a farming thing to say, this is where I catch up with my, let's call it usual network, people I'm aware of, to make sure that you are synced during the year. So one example could be Money 2020. Then there is the second part of my marketing plan, which is more based on the innovation. So that is making sure that each year I find an event where I have never been before. So for this year, for me, that was the Ecom 21 in Riga, in Latvia, which was a huge experience. I didn't quite know what to expect of it, other than I have some ideas myself. And that way, I really try to challenge the way I think myself, to say, I take a chance. In most cases, it's actually worth the time, because in any events, there is so many people behind it that is actually trying to create something great. And then, of course, I'm quite interested in everything that is startup related. I see many of the startup companies you might meet at an event or whatever it might be. Some of them you will see the following years being on their way to being a unicorn, maybe. And then you have already a good foundation with that company, because maybe you met them when they were not that big. Maybe you even gave them attention. Maybe you even helped them in the startup path, where they from a very commercial point of view, what not that interesting, but later on they became a big player. So I think that's not only a personal mindset, it's also in a very tough saying commercially to say, make sure also integrate and communicate with companies and people, even though it might not be the biggest organization in the world, because you never know who the next unicorn or big company might be. It will come out of nowhere. I have seen that a couple of times now, and like, wow, that was the company I met 3 years ago. Now they are like doing super great.
When you go to these events and meet people you have never met before, hear about certain things that you aren't aware of, or building up your knowledge, as well as building on the network you already have today, how does that help you in your work to help your customers and help them succeed? How does that transition into value after the events?
Yeah, it's quite interesting, right? Because most interactions with new people the foundation is not based on a professional mindset, so to speak. I try to do it more personal. In the beginning, I have a feeling if people really like you or think that you are a good person from a personal point of view, then you have a quite good foundation to say, okay, then you can drink a coffee at an event, for example. No matter what, you can always spend like 5 minutes with people. And if people have a good feeling around you, then I think it's way easier if there is a match. And of course, you have something really to say that is of relevance. It's much more in the nature to also talk business. But I never start, for example, talking just pure business with people I never met before. Also, like a personal mindset, I think it's great trying to connect with people. Who are they? Where do they live? Establish some personal connection, and then everything from there is also way easier. It's a better process for everyone. I will not exclude that sometimes, of course, you have very, very hard commercial strategy where it's just purely business meeting business, where you need to finding a solution. That's also fine. But more generally, that is not the approach I have, at least. And then, of course, there is companies you would like to speak with because they fit the business and their offering and services that you might have, where other companies is maybe just not in your periphery because there is not a match in the services that you do. But again, back to your question, it shouldn't be a blocker for meeting and spending time with new people, because you see people, they change job, they change internally in the organization. So you never know who is a benefit to have a relationship or a connection with,
It's actually really interesting, that point you made around making it a personal investment in who they are as individuals, more so than just the business exchange per se. I think that's so valuable. And I've recently had this experience where you suddenly get something back without asking anything because you've invested in them as people.
I think everyone have tried it, right? To be approached for something that is pure business, it can be like maybe a bit too much. Sometimes I don't prefer it myself necessarily. Of course, there is, as in any other things, there is also a situation where it actually might work because it's just a really good match commercially. But overall, I also personally have an idea that if you are in a business for the long term and you need to establish connections, it's way better to do it that way. It's a much nicer way, and you have a stronger connection with people. And then personally, it's way more interesting to know something about people. End of the day, if there is a connection, you can always speak about work and offerings and services. You will always find a solution for that.
Yeah.
That's really the experience I have.
Do you think that evolvement of being more relationship first start to also mold in the way that we do business, in terms of going from tell about the features and functions and are very down to the hard facts very quickly versus
I would definitely say so. When I look at the cases I'm currently working at, most of them is actually business that is being introduced directly or indirectly because they say, this name Ruki, something about payments, and try to speak with him. So, just that little friction and idea can actually be a generator for somebody in your network that they either write directly to you on LinkedIn. I tried that a couple of times. Or even being approached and eventually say, are you the guy that wrote whatever it might be on LinkedIn, right? So all these little fractions that you are doing and investing in people, they might come back in terms of, can you help this guy? Can you try to talk with him? In most cases, it's also about how can you help maybe solve a challenge that you will not get something out of right here, right now. But when you have held a business, maybe how do we go to market? How do we set our prices? Do you know who to speak with from the schemes or wherever it might be? You already have a way into that business later on because you did something to help in the beginning. But then back to what you said in terms of, I would say, yes, it is overall personalized, but I also see a huge demand that when you are behind that phase and you start to scratch a bit more, you also need to be extremely specialized in what you do. I'm not sure it's only payment. Maybe it's even a more general thing. But many of the cases we have, you really need to be able to deep dive into the case. You cannot only be a traditional good sales guys saying the right things and doing the right commercials. You actually need to deep dive into the business and adjust a lot of things. Otherwise, it doesn't have much value because everyone can create a contract. Everyone can maybe do prices better or cheaper than you can. So you need to have way more around your offering than your competitors. For me, I'm trying to let it be the consultant part of it. So can I tell them or can I enlighten them in things they don't know or never knew before? Because then you are actually seen and should be seen more as a consultant than a traditionally, at least to use the term, a salesperson, because yes, they have no doubt that you're trying to sell something, which is fair, that's fully transparent, but this is not where you start. You start in other places to advise or give them insights, data, reporting they didn't have. And when they have a feeling, okay, this is a company, as we do in Shift4, that have relevant information for us, they even have people that can show up at our office showing us very concrete what is the prices for a Visa or MasterCard in this region. How do we process American Express in Sweden? If you can advise in all these things so they don't need to invest the time, research, find out themselves, you actually already helped them or created a path that have made the day or the challenge easier. And that can be very beneficial.
We are switching gears a little bit. You were touching up on your engagement with your customers. I would love to deep dive into some of your recent case studies. I know that you had a great stand and you have great visibility on transforming more of a sustainable payments infrastructure. Tell me a little bit more.
Yeah, so I think that to pick one maybe to focus on, I would say it is no secret that the Tomra case that we did with the Norwegian company. And for those that didn't know Tomra, I think they are almost the market leader in not only Europe, but also international. If you go into your supermarket and deposit your bottles into these reverse vending machine, if you look at the name in the right corner, most of them would be Tomra machines. I didn't pay attention to that before. Now I don't see anything else than Tomra machines when I go to supermarkets. But I think this is really a case where we showed how can payments, how can innovation be an important step or milestone in achieving something greater than just process a transaction. It's no secret that from a payment company point of view here at Shift4, of course, we want to grow our business. We want to make sure how can we get more of the market shares? How can we get more transactions? How can we increase our revenue? That is totally transparent. That is what we are here to do, end of the day. But you can keep that mindset, and then you can try to build it together with other things that has relevance, which I think the Tomra case is a very good example of. Because here, yes, we get new business, we establish a new channel of income, but we actually also solve some real life challenges. So just to take it very top bottom down, the Tomra case was a project that we did with Aarhus Kommune in Denmark. As every other city in Europe, they have huge issues with people buying coffees. Then you have the cup. It's a paper cup. And then most of the people, if they can't find a trash can, unfortunately, it's ending up on the street, right? So that's a real problem, not only in Aarhus in Denmark, but in general. And that was great to see how can we actually, as a payment company, be a part of the equation of solving these things. What we came up with Tomra, who have the whole infrastructure of recycling and reusable, is let's create a cup for, this was a pilot for the city of Aarhus. So if you go into, even the big brands is supporting these kind of ideas, which is great. So if you go into Espresso House, if you go into even Starbucks or local cafes like La Cabra or other ones in Aarhus to get a coffee, you can choose as a consumer to get a reusable cup instead of a traditional cup. Then it costs you 5 DKK, 5 crowns extra. And then you can go into a Tomra vending machine. You tap your card. You can do the physical card. You can do it via your wallet. That doesn't matter. You tap your card. You deposit your cup. And then instantly, with the help of skill products, and that is a product where you say, I have my credit card. I tap it. I deposit my cup. Then instantly, and instantly in payments is like 30 minutes, right? But instantly sounds good. Then you would have the money. So that
You
would
say
be the
30
deposit.
minutes?
Yeah, within 30 minutes.
Yeah.
Yeah. In most cases, especially in the Nordics, it is happening within seconds or minutes. If it's outside of Europe, it could be 2 days, but it says on the screen actually, so you're well aware. The case is that you get the money into your bank account. So whatever credit card, Visa, MasterCard in this case, that you present to the card reader, then the system, thanks to Visa, thanks to MasterCard, will know, we are sending money back on that card, and that will end on the account and the bank that issued the card. So that is tapping into a global infrastructure that is already there. So you could argue the product is there. Shift4 is just binding the connection to say, this is a traditional product that has been used for online. Let's say maybe even gambling is very popular. You do something online, you win 100 euros. Now we take that product, we bring it into the physical world with an unattended payment device, and we actually help solving a problem. And then just to share some insights, we saw from Aarhus Kommune that the amount of paper cups is reduced. The amount of emission that we are leading out is also reduced. So, this is just a case that is triggering all the right things that we want to achieve and how to stay relevant. Yes, we can process a transaction from A to Z if you want to buy new shoes, but now we also took the full ownership to say, what is happening with the things we buy afterwards? How, in a secure way, do they get recycled? And how do you, as a consumer, how are you a part of that equation? How do we, as a payment company, as a technology company, how are we relevant for that kind of solutions?
Yeah.
Well, that is an interesting case that is actually creating something that is solving a real life issue.
I really love the fact that you think beyond the traditional rails and thinking about how to do good, and also taking responsibility and having a say in that responsibility of what happens after the purchase, because often we forget about that, and then it becomes the consumer's responsibility and not the brand or the store. But here it's focusing on taking that responsibility and being more aware of the climate and how to, with everything going on with ESG and responsibilities there. So I really love this case.
Did you try it, Christie?
Actually, I did not, because I didn't buy any coffee.
Okay.
So I did not, but I did observe people doing it at the Nordic FinTech Week earlier into last year, I should say.
Yeah.
So yeah, I did see it being used. And here in Copenhagen, we have Tivoli, which have a similar kind of with the cups, and you can get the 5 kroners return after you have bought a cocoa or whatever you have bought. So it gave me a little bit of a flashback of the system that they have in the Tivoli Gardens here in Copenhagen.
Yeah, because the truth is that everyone, I think, consumer-wise, wants to do something. Everyone knows that the cups need to go into the bin, right? But you also need to make it easy to do the right thing, right? You need to nudge them. And this is where I really see payments in general, because if it is driven by money, or if it is driven by an incentive, I rather say, then you have created a path of the consumer to say, I want to do the right thing. Now I'm even being nudged, and it is easy to do the right thing. And that is just having a great outcome. And I think not only this case, but also going forwardly, that should be the mindset of maybe not only payment companies, but especially technology, to say, yes, of course, there is the tradition of doing business. That might even be our bread and butter, and that should never be neglected. But there is also things where we should invest our time. That is not the biggest case right here, right now, but maybe from a more environmental point of view is a great thing to invest in. So I think Shift4 has done a really good job in making sure that we are now a part of that transition. And it's also leading to other companies looking at the Tomra case and say, how can we use this, implement it in the way we do business, and then take ownership of, for example, reusable or recycling? Because there's a lot of companies out there that is actually trying to solve this challenge. Now, as a technology and payment company, we actually have a solution that we can bring to market and say, this is how we could do it as an option.
What was the biggest surprise through that partnership and collaboration to bring that solution to life and being able to allow customers to support and that full circle of reusable cups? What was the biggest surprise in that partnership?
I think there was a lot of surprises, actually, but I think to give you an example, and if there's anyone out there tried the solution, they might know what I will refer to, but we created a solution that was so streamlined and so easy to use, because normally people is used to scanning a QR code, downloading an app, the thing where you basically just tap your card. In the beginning in Aarhus, when we tried to see how is people adapting to this new solution, it was almost too easy, because people was like, okay, is this it? What happened with my cup? What about my money? What was that just it? So sometimes you actually have created a solution that is really good, but where you also need, especially from a payment perspective, to realize, yes, it might make sense for you because you work in this industry, but picking a random consumer off the street, might not given that you tap your card and get money into your account, because maybe you never tried that solution, maybe you never heard of it, and then some people actually thought that it was scam and was like, okay, what happened? Did you stole my credit card details? And if you didn't receive the money like within 30 seconds, maybe, or 15 seconds, then people was getting nervous, and some even complained. So I think you need to realize in all industry, the things you do, even though it's technically is easy and a good solution on the paper and in the Excel sheet, it might not be adapted the same way when you go to market, because you really need to bring down the message and the customer journey to make sure what exactly do you tell the consumers that is going to happen? There is nothing that is given. And that was my biggest surprise, maybe also like a damaged mindset of working in payments, that it was given when you tap your card. Of course, you got your money back. It was not given at all. And we need to adjust a lot of things regarding the customer journey, making sure there was text on the screen that explained really step by step. You do A, deposit your cup. You do B, tap your card. Step 3, you get money, but make sure it might take up to X amount of time. And then you could see, okay, it started to get better. But adaptation from a consumer perspective is always slower than you anticipate, and they never think it is as you thought it would be when you go to market. So you really need to be way more concrete than you could almost imagine when you sit with the products. And it's also an exercise internally and externally to say, how can we actually convert this thing we do, which could be, of course, in many cases quite complex, and really bring it down to something that everyone can understand. That's rather difficult to do.
With your experience, what would you advise others to make sure that they do or think about before they go in and maybe figure out if there's a product market fit, or they might even be in the phase of scaling the solutions across different markets?
I think one of the things that could be great to consider, not only with new products, but also, as you mentioned, Christie, if you go into new markets, a bit back to what I probably already said, make sure that nothing is given. I think make sure that you perform the right due diligence going into a market. It is not enough to look on a report or look at data. You need to be there in person. You need to find out how is the local infrastructure. When you are at a place where you want your solution to be, you always find out something that you would never be able to find out when you sit back home looking at the data or reporting, because you really get a feeling also speaking with the people that is living, let's say, in a country where something is being implemented. What is the local ecosystem? Is there anything you need to be aware of? One example could be local wallets. We saw it many times. International companies trying to go into the Nordics, they might forget everything about that. We have the Danish kroner. We don't have euros. We have a local wallet. If you don't consider these things, it could actually end up being not as a good launch as you think. So make sure to be there in person. Data-driven, of course, is a word that has been speaking about a lot, but I would say that it never stand alone. And then I think the second point would be, if you know what you are doing is a good product, then maybe just do it. You might even have some data that will say, yeah, you are doing something that is helping A, B, and C, but you don't earn exactly what you think. Sometimes it can be a really good learning to say, if you are doing something greater than just process a payment, then maybe just do it. Maybe you need to take a chance sometimes, because the data might not always tell you the full truth of how it's being implemented. And I would say, to give you a top 3, involve everything and everyone you can internally that's just have the slightest involvement in this. I think we have seen many times how, without mentioning names, people is trying to build something really great, maybe even binding the Nordic together with a common payment platform, and spending a lot of years and money, where if you involve the right stakeholders from beginning high and low, you will have a way broader view when you do these kind of products and launches. And to give you an example, in Denmark, we did a really good partnership with a partner that have never done payments before. But their idea was, we want to go to market and we want to give small businesses a free payment terminal. But this was people that has been sold alarm systems for the last couple of years. And to give them a chance to understand them from a more personal point of view, this is people that is actually all in. Let's give them a chance. That can be a huge benefit sometimes. If you have the right feeling, if this is the right team, if this is the right people behind a product or a launch, maybe give them a chance.
As we're now starting to look ahead, what would you like to see change in the industry in the next, let's say, 5 years?
Okay, so if we look at the market overall, of course, from the way payments in general, especially credit cards, is built up, it is actually quite complicated, even though you don't feel it as a consumer, because there is so many parts involved on processing a transaction. So not only personal, also from a company side of view, I really hope to see that there is solutions maybe already being created now, deployed in this and next year, where we can see how can we actually make the life easier for consumers in terms of payments. End of the day, if you look at it, it's actually just moving money from A to B. How can we do it in the most convenient way? How can we do it in the cheapest way? A lot of people would argue for this is what open banking do, but I also see other areas of improvement. So I really hope, without having a concrete example or product to present to you, that the market in general, and this I think is already ongoing, streamlining the solutions for consumers in terms of payment, to say how can we move things from a payment perspective faster, better, and maybe most importantly, how can we do it way more secure? Not only in the Nordics, but also in Europe, we see that the spike of fraud in general, especially towards credit cards, that is increasingly significantly. Phishing emails going out, very, very creative ways that the people is getting their access to bank or even credit cards stolen. It's a huge problem. I think better, easier solution will also result in way better security. So imagine that you actually fall for a phishing email or give your information. How can we create a solution where it is still not possible to have your money stolen, basically? So I would say picking two items, maybe just to make it a bit focused, way more secure and way more easier, even though I see that those two are on the same parallel.
Fantastic. As we're wrapping up, we just spoke about where the market is headed and the trends and so forth. We at Pantrium love being challenged and challenge people's viewpoints and just share other people's lessons. Who do you follow that inspires or provoke your way of thinking?
I do follow a lot of people, especially on LinkedIn. If I need to choose someone that is challenging my way of thinking or even provoke me a bit, I'm very keen on saying Elon Musk, actually, because it might not be the first time you hear it. I think it's a very common answer, but that is actually the only one I would be able to think of, especially when I see how he created a competitor to NASA, introduced charging and Tesla, combining the infrastructure, where I'm like, okay, that's not supposed to be one people coming up with so many great companies that is affecting your day. And I just must say that I'm really surprised in a positive way what one man can driven, and that can provoke me on the same time to say how can this guy go in and define and disrupt industry to industry that is not even related. That is, I think, worth thinking about, to say yes, companies might be a market leader for 20, 30 years. We saw it with Nokia, I think, as well, right? But really your position is never secure. It's never given. It can be a startup tomorrow that can take over your market, and you really never know. That is a provocative thought, I think, commercially, knowing that it's not giving that you have the customers or partners or the volume that you might have now. You are not better than the next day. And that's really challenging. And also I would say it's good to think about, because it makes you not using it as a pillow, in the sense that when you know it's not given, even though you might have a partner for 5, 7 years, who knows if they want to continue next year? It's not given, and that makes you sure you need to work for the things you have right here, right now, on top of what you also want to achieve going further, and that is quite challenging to be aware of.
Yeah.
It's way easier to think everything will just continue the way it is, right? That's a nice thought to have, but very rare, I think that's actually the case.
Yeah. But it's also a really good way to bring it full circle to what you spoke about early in this discussion, right? Where it's about disrupting and things are changing at rapid speed, and you need to stay alert to new trends, because you never know when that, as you said, that crypto or Web3 or any other perhaps a very futuristic startup might become the next big competitor to you. You never know. With that, I have one last question before we wrap up. I would like to know, who has been a leader throughout your career that have made a lasting impression on you, Ruben?
You have so good question. I actually need to think about them, which I think is good, right? When I was around 16 years old, I worked in a supermarket in the local village where I live on southern Zealand, and so it's not very recently, but it's actually funny that I'm thinking about it. So what my job was, I was filling up grocery, and after I filled up grocery, it was like crazy early in the morning. I think maybe not 5, but maybe 6, and then half an hour, and then went to school. And there was a leader there that always had something to say when I did my job, which I think actually was quite annoying. But the impression and the reason I was thinking about it when you ask your question is, I actually realized some years later that because he had all these things all the time, like, okay, you could do this to improve, and why don't you start there filling up the grocery instead of here? Make sure you start with all the things that is cold, just always had some improvements to give me that I think was annoying. What was actually because that he thought that I could do better. So even though it might not be relevant to what I do today, I think that was a leader where the perception or the idea that I then took later into my job, which I can use now, that is, if, and I learned that back then actually, if leaders in general, you feel they are trying to come with ideas, suggestions, or you feel they are pushing you, it is actually, you should consider it under the right terms and conditions. You should consider it a good thing. Maybe they see without having a better impression, they might see the light in you. They might see, here is actually something, or here is actually someone that we can improve with the right feedback. And even though it might not feel that great all the time to receive feedback or improvement, it might actually be a good thing. And I really learned to be aware, if you have management aspect then that is pushing you, it's good to embrace it, because it is because they actually want something good out of you, and not being, they don't meant to be pushy or annoying. It's actually, it's just like the first feeling you might get as a new one in the job market, and that had actually made an impression that I has used a lot of time to say, I feel like somebody is keep coming with things, but it had turned out most of the times to be because people wanted you to do better, or they actually want you to succeed in your job.
I love that. And I think it's a great way to wrap up our fantastic conversation. How do you learn and how do you stay positive to feedback? And yes, of course, sometimes feedback might not be delivered as you had hoped or want, but over time, it will sink in, and it will actually help mold you as a person and as a leader and as a professional. So I think that was a really great story. And I really appreciate your time, Ruben. We are totally out of time. And
Totally. I just realized I cannot be 16 when I was in middle school. I was probably more like way younger than that. It maybe 10, 11 years actually. So that's the memory I have now.
I love that. Thank you so much for your time, Ruben. It has been a
Sure.
pleasure to have you on the Patreon podcast. So thank you so much for being here with me today.
Thanks for having me, Christie.
If this episode gave you something to think about, I'll be really grateful if you could share this with your LinkedIn network. And to make sure you don't miss out on any new episodes, simply follow Patreon wherever you are listening or watching. And just a note, the opinions and views shared by our guests are entirely their own and don't necessarily represent the businesses they work for. We really hope you enjoyed this episode. Until next time, bye for now.